Hi to everyone who's joined us. We're going to just give it another minute or two to let others join, and then we'll get started shortly. Okay, so it's 5:32. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for the CCB's first live educational webinar regarding consumption lounges. Today's date is September 1st, 2022, and this webinar will last approximately 90 minutes. The purpose of this webinar is to assist potential applicants in understanding the application process and successfully submitting an application for a consumption lounge. So joining from the CCB are myself, Tiana Bonner, I'm the Public Information Officer, Sarah Tajali, the Education Information Officer, Michael Miles, Deputy Director, Steve Gilbert, Chief of Administration, Glenroy Cole, Program Manager overseeing consumption lounges, and Sydney Booker, who's part of our consumption lounge team. So to give you a rundown of what to expect during this webinar, the first half will be dedicated to presentations on various topics by CCB staff. And then the second half, there will be an open question and answer period, and we'll go over some housekeeping notes and guidelines before beginning that. Additionally, you may enter questions into the chat at any time during this webinar. Sydney is monitoring that chat and will flag your questions for us to circle back to in the second half. We've also added several helpful links in the chat. That should be under the Answered tab in case you can't find it. You may want to copy and paste those for future reference. And of course, all of those links, as well as the information covered in our presentation, are available on the CCB's Consumption Lounge page. Additionally, frequently asked questions from this webinar and the answers to those questions will be compiled and posted on the CCB's website. This webinar is being live streamed on the CCB's YouTube page. So once this is over, it'll be available to review at any time on YouTube as well. And finally, I want to note that these webinars are for informational purposes only and do not constitute legal advice or represent the CCB's position or policy on any specific set of facts or circumstances. Applicants are encouraged to seek legal counsel to ensure their applications comply with all applicable instructions, statutes, and regulations, and how those specific statutes and regulations may apply to a specific set of facts and or circumstances. So we'll go ahead and get started. During this webinar, we encourage you to take notes. We'll start with a brief background of the Consumption Lounge program, and then we'll discuss how to prepare to apply for a Consumption Lounge license. This includes components of the application, such as the Nevada State Business License, agent card requirements, information required for owners, officers, and board members, and acceptable payment methods. Then we'll go over the social equity program and its eligibility requirements. And finally, we'll discuss the diversity plan, which is a requirement for all applicant types. And again, links to corresponding worksheets and other online tools and resources are available on our website, and they've also been added to that chat. So This webinar is meant to provide a broad overview of consumption lounges in Nevada. We did receive a few questions regarding regulations that apply to consumption lounges, and will not be discussing specific regulations in this webinar. However, we encourage you to review the information, including our regulations and FAQs that are on our website at your own pace. We'll begin with a brief walkthrough of how we got to this point. AB 341 passed last year during the 81st legislative session, authorized the CCB to license and regulate consumption lounges. NRS 678A, B, and D apply to consumption lounges along with the Nevada Cannabis Compliance Regulations, or NCCRs. Last summer, the Cannabis Advisory Commission, or CAC, and its subcommittees on public health, public safety, and diversity, equity, and inclusion held a series of workshops to draft recommendations for the regulations. And so over the past year, between the CAC and the CCB, we've held 15 public meetings on the topic. The regulations you see online today were approved at the CCB's June board meeting. So initially, retail dispensaries may apply for and open one retail lounge per licensee, meaning if a dispensary has multiple locations, they'll need to pick just one as the site for their lounge. Based on interest and eligibility, we estimate there will be around 40 to 45 lounges, retail lounges, able to open initially across the state. Additionally, AB 341 authorized 20 independent lounges, and this is a separate type of lounge. Of the 20 independent lounge licenses, half of those, meaning 10, have been designated for social equity applicants. A little bit later on, we'll go into the greater detail about who's eligible to apply as a social equity applicant. But first, I'll turn it over to Sarah. She's going to discuss the steps required for all applicants of any lounge type.
Thanks, Tiana. Okay. So the first step in preparing to apply for a cannabis consumption lounge is applying for a Nevada state business license. Per NRS 678B, all applicants must provide the legal name of the proposed cannabis consumption lounge filed with the Nevada Secretary of State's office, and they'll need this name when applying for their agent's cards as well. Prior to filling out your application, you must file articles of incorporation or other formation documents with the Nevada Secretary of State's office. If you need assistance in applying for a license, the Lieutenant Governor's office houses the Office of Small Business Advocacy that can help you with your process. Okay, to register your business entity and receive guidance on how to form your business, you can visit nvsilverflume.gov, or you can visit the Nevada Secretary of State's website at nvsos.gov. And to learn more about the Office of Small Business Advocacy, you can visit ltgov.nv.gov/OSBA/home. As just a note, the legal name of the proposed cannabis consumption lounge on your application must match as it appears on the Nevada Secretary of State's office. All of these links on this slide were shared in the Q&A at the beginning of the webinar, and they're also available on all preparing to apply materials on our website. Okay. When preparing to apply, you should also research local ordinances regarding cannabis establishments in the jurisdiction in which you wish to apply, as local jurisdictions may limit or prohibit cannabis consumption lounges. At the time of application, you will not need a specific street address, but you will need to identify the local jurisdiction in which you're applying for. The jurisdiction you choose cannot be changed once your application is submitted. Right, now let's move on to agent cards. The next step in preparing for the application period is ensuring that each owner, officer, and board member of the business submits an application for a cannabis consumption lounge license. For a cannabis consumption lounge agent card. Each cannabis establishment type has their own agent card type, and you cannot use your agent card numbers for any other establishment type. So all owners, officers, and board members must submit an application for the cannabis consumption lounge agent card. And then when you're filling out the application, you'll be required to input each of the owners, officers, and board members' agent card numbers. So you'll need this before the application, before you start filling out your application. We recommend filling out your agent card application as early as possible. However, you cannot apply for a cannabis consumption lounge agent card until 30 days prior to the consumption lounge application period. Right. Okay, when applying for an agent card, the applicant must provide the personal and demographic information presented on the slide, including name, date of birth, percentage of ownership in the business, citizenship status, and other identifying information. A full list of what goes into the agent card application can be found on the Preparing to Apply worksheet. Okay. In addition to the identifying information in the previous slide, sorry, this keeps skipping ahead on me. You must also verify that you are at least 21 years old, have not been convicted of a felony offense defined in NRS 678B.050, and are compliant with court orders for child support. You must also provide the number for any agent card you already possess and cannot have had an agent registration card revoked. Additionally, you must pledge not to dispense or divert cannabis to any person not authorized to possess cannabis. And again, more information can be found on the Preparing to Apply worksheet, which we linked earlier in the workshop, and it's also on our website. All right. The agent card application also requires a color photo of the person's government ID and a passport quality photo. For the passport quality photo, the photo should be a clear photo of the face with no obstructions, in good lighting, against a plain white background. No headwear can be worn, including anything that obstructs the hairline, with exception of religious head coverings. We've created a cannabis agent registration card photo requirement worksheet, which we linked in the Q&A earlier, but you can also find this document under the industry page on the CCB website and linked in our YouTube videos. Okay. All right, so to apply for your agent card, you can access it on the Acela Cannabis customer portal using the URL on the screen, or you can find a direct link on the CCB website under the industry login button in the top right corner of the website. After you've created an account and logged in, follow the step-by-step instructions for agent cards. And once you register, you'll receive a confirmation page with your registration record number. We recommend printing this page. You'll also receive a confirmation email with your record number and a link with instructions on how to fulfill the fingerprint requirement. Agent card applicants are required to have their fingerprints taken by an authorized fingerprint agency. In your agent card application confirmation email, you'll receive a hyperlink with instructions on how to fulfill the fingerprint requirements. For the consumption lounge application, payment for the agent card fee will not be required unless your consumption lounge application is selected for a prospective license. However, you must submit and pay for your fingerprints as instructed by the form linked in the agent card confirmation email in order to complete your agent card application. We have another in-depth workshop on how to apply your agent card on the consumption lounge page on our website. During the application process, you'll also need to input identifying information for all proposed owners, officers, and board members, including any owners, officers, and board members of intermediary companies in the ownership structure. On the following slides, we'll go into that more in depth. On the slide you see here, the tracking tool we have is on our Preparing to Apply workshop, so you can keep track of all the information for each owner, officer, and board member in the proposed business. Okay, so what you're going to need for each proposed owner, officer, and board member is their name, including first, middle, and last name. You'll need the address on their government issued ID. The address should match the address on the government issued ID they uploaded into their agent card application. and you'll need the full address, including the city, state, and zip code. Next, you'll need their date of birth and the last 4 digits of their social security number. If they do not have a social security number, you'll enter the last 4 digits of their tax ID number. For each owner, officer, and board member, you'll also need their consumption lounge agent card application record number. Remember, a person can hold multiple types of agent cards, so be sure you're using their consumption lounge number. And then you'll indicate what role the person plays in your business. You have the option to check if they are an owner, officer, or board member, and you can check all that apply. You'll also be asked whether the person has ownership in another cannabis establishment in Nevada. If they do, they must provide you with the cannabis establishment ID number. If any application has an owner who owns 5% or greater interest in any entity within the ownership organization chart, and that owner is also on any other application listed as an owner who owns 5% or greater interest in any entity within the ownership structure, all such applications will be removed from consideration. And finally, you'll need to indicate if the person qualifies as a social equity applicant, which we'll review in the following slides. Okay. Before we go into detail, I'll just give you a quick overview of what qualifies as a social equity candidate. First, an applicant or group of applicants which meet the social equity qualifications must have at least 51% ownership in the business. Second, they must have resided in a disproportionately impacted area for the last 5 years. And finally, they must have had a cannabis-related offense. If they do not have a cannabis-related offense, they may also qualify as a social equity applicant if a close family member lives or has lived in a DIA for at least 5 years and has a prior cannabis-related offense. The first factor that determines social equity eligibility is ownership. The applicant must be the majority stakeholder in the independent cannabis consumption lounge. And this is strictly limited to ownership and does not include those who hold board member or officer status without any ownership. If multiple owners in the business qualify as social equity applicants, they can combine their percentage of ownership to equal or exceed 51%. Okay, next, applicants must have lived in a disproportionately impacted area for the last 5 years. To be considered a DIA, the area must have a qualifying score in 2 categories. First, an area where a census tract or tracts as of the 2010 census have an incarceration rate of 3.3% or higher, which would put the tract in the 90th percentile or higher when compared to the rest of the country. Second, the address or addresses must have an area deprivation index score of 7 or higher on a state decile scale. To determine if your address or addresses meet the DIA criteria, you'll utilize 2 tools. First, the Opportunity Atlas is used to determine the incarceration rates of an area. The Opportunity Atlas incorporates data from the United States Census, federal income tax returns, and the American Community Survey to measure a person's social mobility based on the neighborhood where they grew up. And you can access the Opportunity Atlas at opportunityatlas.org. Next, the Neighborhood Atlas is used to find an area's area deprivation index score. This tool uses the American Community Survey to determine an area's socioeconomic disadvantage. And that URL is neighborhood-atlas.medicine.wisc.edu. We won't be going over these tools in today's workshop, but we have 2 resources that walk you through how to use these websites to find your scores. First, the Social Equity Eligibility webinar, which is on YouTube and the Consumption Lounge page. And we also have a Social Equity Methodology worksheet, which is on the Social Equity page on the CCB website. We've also linked to these resources in the Q&A earlier in the webinar. The CCB has created a social equity worksheet that's designed to assist you in determining your eligibility as a social equity applicant. to answer the attestations in the application. The worksheet also provides examples of the type of documents you'll need to provide if you're selected, and a tracking tool to help track your DIA scores. You will need to provide a piece of evidence for each year that you resided in a DIA, but you will not be required to upload supporting documentation during the application process. Evidence is only required if you're selected to move on to the next step of the process. Examples of evidence could include a receipt for rent or a lease, a record from a public utility, a stub from an employment check, a tax record, or a notarized statement from an owner stating that the applicant lived at that residence located in a DIA. This list is not exhaustive. We have included more examples of evidence on the social equity eligibility worksheet and in the regulations. And the final qualification for social equity is the applicant must have been convicted of a nonviolent felony and/or misdemeanor cannabis offense. If an applicant has 2 or more felonies or a category A felony, as defined by NRS 678B.050, they are ineligible to apply. If you'd like to learn more about these excluded felonies, visit the laws and regulation page on the CCB website. If an applicant does not have a conviction, they may also qualify for social equity status if a close family member, which includes a parent, sibling, or child, was convicted of a felony cannabis offense and they live or have lived in a DIA. If your application is selected for a prospective license, you must provide proof of you or your family member's conviction. This proof should be in the form of a certified copy of the judgment of conviction and/or a proceeding sheet and/or court minutes. When filling out the application for a lounge, you will be asked to attest to whether or not you qualify as a social equity applicant based on the criteria discussed, and you must meet all ownership, DIA residency, and cannabis conviction requirements. During the application process, you will have to enter all the owners of your business into your initial application, their ownership percentage, and indicate whether or not each owner is a social equity applicant. And for the DIA and conviction requirements, you will not have to submit proof during the application process, only if you are selected for a prospective license. Now I'll pass it back to Tiana, who will cover the diversity plan and processing fees.
Thank you, Sarah. So first, it's important to note that a diversity plan is required by all applicants regardless of lounge license type. Applicants for both retail and independent consumption lounges must upload and submit this plan with their application. In order to meet the minimum scoring guidelines, the applicant must affirm that they have and will implement a diversity plan. This attestation will be accomplished by checking a box, which will be included in the initial application. Per NRS 678B.324, diversity refers to race, ethnicity, or gender, and the inclusion of other persons of backgrounds which are disproportionately underrepresented. However, the CCB is also encouraging the inclusion of other underrepresented groups, including veterans, persons with disabilities, and LGBTQ+. So broadly speaking, this plan should include objectives, timetables, actionable steps, and evaluation metrics. I'm just giving, there we go. One more slide. And as specified in the regulations, the diversity plan should include the following: demographic information of each owner, officer, board member, employees, and independent contractors, strategies for obtaining a diverse group of owners, officers, board members, and employees, diversity goals for employee hiring and retention, a plan for diversity-related outreach or events that the applicant will conduct to support its diversity goals, any materials reflecting the applicant's mentoring, training, or professional development programs for diverse groups, and finally, proposed timelines and benchmarks for achieving the goals outlined in this plan. So in your diversity plan, you should include the demographic information of each known officer, board member, employees, and independent contractors who have chosen to respond to your inquiry. Now, we recognize that at the time of the application, these positions may not all have been filled. So just provide the information based on your current staffing or proposed staffing. You'll want to include the following information, but should make sure that any response is optional: gender identity, racial or ethnic identity, any other represented group, including but not limited to LGBTQ+, disability status, and/or veteran status. You may also add an option, prefer not to answer, for all of your questions, in addition to making those responses optional. So next, you'll want to include your strategies for recruitment of a diverse workforce. To answer this portion of the diversity plan, you can ask yourself the following questions. What type of outreach do you plan to do to recruit a larger and more diverse pool of applicants? This could include social media, community outreach, job fairs, or participation in local events, as a few examples. What resources, training, or professional development programs are you willing to offer? And how will you demonstrate your commitment to diversity to current and potential employees? Next, you should outline your short and long-term goals for recruitment and retention of a diverse staff and how you envision reaching those goals. For example, you can state that prior to opening, you'd like to host a recruitment event in a disproportionately impacted area. It's also worth noting here that the board may also require additional information or documentation. Those requests will be communicated with the applicant if it's necessary. And once plans are received, the board will determine whether the stated goals outlined in each diversity plan are reasonable and represent a good faith effort. The board will review the diversity plan as part of the suitability determination for licensure. We also want to make mention here that once an applicant's conditional license has been issued, the diversity plan which they submit will not be confidential. This is in our regulations, and it was based on feedback that we received during our workshops. However, names and any other personally identifying information that may be included in a diversity plan will remain confidential pursuant to NCCR 6.035. And so for more guidance on diversity plans, the CCB has created a worksheet to help guide you as you draft your plan. That's on our Consumption Lounge page. And so next, we're going to discuss the processing fees and payment methods. To successfully submit your Consumption Lounge application, payment of the processing fee will be required. The CCB will accept ACH payment, cashier's check, or money order. The processing fees are $100,000 for a retail lounge license, $10,000 for an independent lounge license, and $2,500 for social equity applicants who are applying for an independent lounge. Just remember that processing fees are non-refundable. Failure to pay your processing fee by the deadline will result in your application being rejected. All dates will be posted on the CCB website 30 days in advance of the application period opening. Electronic ACH payments can be made online through the Consumption Lounge application when that's completed in Acela. Acela will redirect the applicant to CyberSource, where they will complete their ACH transaction, and a payment authorization will be sent from support@cybersource.com. If you're paying via ACH, just be sure to have your banking information ready, including your bank account number and your routing number. To pay by cashier's check or money order, you'll need to present the payment in person at the CCB office in either Carson City or Las Vegas, no later than 5 p.m. on the day of the application deadline. The payment must clear for your application to move forward. Payment via mail or any other form of commercial delivery service, such as FedEx, UPS, or DHL, will not be accepted. Additionally, cash, personal checks, or business checks will not be accepted. Remember that all payments must be submitted either online or in person. So that concludes the presentation portion of our webinar. I did notice that some people may have had some issues finding all of those links that we keep referring to in the chat. If you don't see them for whatever reason, we also are streaming this on YouTube, and that live stream has all of those links also in the caption. of that YouTube video. So we'll be sure to try and share as many ways to access those links as we can. Let's see. So now we'll move on to the question and answer portion. Please note that out of respect for everyone's time, we'll answer as many questions as we can up until 7. We have an hour, so that's a lot of time. First, we're going to start with questions that we received in writing during registration, and then we'll move into the live questions. So Sydney, I'll hand it over to you.
Yes, the first question we have, we got from online is, I was wondering if I could get more clarification on the difference between the retail and independent consumption lounge licenses.
Okay, so the difference between a retail and an independent consumption lounge license is a retail would be for a current cannabis license holder. So if you have a dispensary, you would qualify for a retail consumption lounge. An independent consumption lounge would be someone who's not already licensed in the cannabis industry in Nevada.
Okay. So the next question I have here is, can one person apply for both an independent lounge license and a retail lounge license and wait to see which license type is granted?
So the easy answer for that is no. You have to apply for either one or the other. Again, if you're a retail license holder already, you would apply for the retail. If you are a person who's entering into the cannabis industry, you would apply for the independent consumption lounge license.
And just to clarify, not just that you're new to the industry, just that you don't have a sales facility license or a retail license already.
Thank you for that. We have another question. Will there be another opportunity in the future for lounge applications? It's my understanding that there may not be a second wave of applications.
The answer to that is maybe. Right now, there's just going to be the one licensing round that we're going to set up shortly. For there to be another licensing round, there'd have to be a statutory change in the next legislative session.
Okay. Then another question I have here from online. I understand the cannabis consumption lounge license processing fee is non-refundable. Since the CCB is limited on the number of independent cannabis consumption lounge licenses, my issue is, what happens to my processing fee if I'm not issued an independent cannabis consumption lounge license?
So you are correct. The licensing fee or processing fee is non-refundable. Revenue from the lounge processing fees are used to pay for the costs of the board in carrying out the application process, and then any excess revenue that is left over after that is deposited in the state or forwarded to the state treasurer to be deposited in the state education fund. And all that information can be found in NRS 678B.390.
Great. Okay, we have another question here. I would like to open a cannabis consumption lounge in Pahrump next to a casino. Is this an appropriate location?
Well, we can't speak specifically to that location, but I can tell you that if you were successful in receiving a prospective license in Nye County, you would be able to open one up in Nye County. However, it is up to the local jurisdiction to approve that location that you have chosen, and then come back to the state CCB to approve your final license. The state does have statutory language around the separation requirements between schools, community facilities, non-restricted gaming licenses, and that's in statute and regulation. However, the distance separation for non-restricted gaming license only applies to counties with a population of 100,000 or more.
Okay. I have a question here. It says, will the CCB take into account any born and raised Las Vegas applicants? Is there any consideration given for born and raised locals who have always contributed to the Valley?
Unfortunately, the short answer to that is no, they will not. There is a doctrine in the federal constitution called the Dormant Commerce Clause that doesn't allow us to favor in-state residents as compared to out-of-state residents. But we would like to.
Okay. Another question here. Is there a specific time for which to apply, or is it something a dispensary owner can apply for at a later date?
No, there'll be the 10-day open application period. That is for both retail attached and independent consumption lounge licenses. So you only have the 10-day window to apply.
Okay. Another question. We want to do our due diligence and adhere to the new guidelines regarding the launch of consumption lounges. In reviewing the regulations, I didn't see anything specific on delivery. As a third-party delivery service, do you have any information you can share with me regarding delivery to these establishments?
So independent lounges will be required to have products transferred in using a licensed cannabis distributor. Retail cannabis consumption lounges that are either attached or adjoined or adjacent will not be required to use a distribution licensee to transfer products in. However, the board does retain the right to require a distribution license in certain instances. So we do encourage any licensees that are awarded a prospective or a conditional license to work really closely with their inspection team, with our inspection team during that period to verify that a distribution licensee is not required to transfer products in to the consumption lounge.
Thank you for that. What is the definition of any one person in NRS 678B.325 and NRS 67B.328, since most licenses for adult use cannabis retail store establishments are owned by LLCs, which then have individual members with varying percentage ownerships?
So to answer that, person is defined in NCCR 1.137. It means person means natural persons, applicant, limited partnerships, limited liability companies, corporations, publicly traded corporations, private investment companies, trusts, holding company, or other forms of business organizations such as defined by the board.
And does the lounge need to be backed by a dispensary licensed SOP? And can the lounge be located on the strip within 2 or more miles from the sponsoring dispensary?
There's multiple answers to that. I think if it's a retail attached license, then absolutely it has to be owned by a dispensary. If it's an independent, they'll have to contract with dispensary because they have to purchase all their cannabis and cannabis products from a dispensary to be able to sell them at the lounge. And for the independents, there is no limitation on distance from that dispensary that you're contracting with. And the limitation on a retail attached is in the NCCRs, it's under NCCR 15.100. It either has to be attached or immediately adjacent. And immediately adjacent means having a common border with another property. including the intersection of property lines at property corners with no street, building, and or other property between and approved, and it must be approved by the local jurisdiction.
Okay, thanks. I'll take over from here and just answer some of the questions that have been put in the Q&A during the presentation. First one is, what is the proper NAICS code when applying for a Nevada state business license?
That information we'll have to find. So if you could submit this question, or we'll post this answer on our FAQs.
And do you need a business license before getting the agent card?
No, you don't. That's not part of the requirements of the agent card application process. However, you can go and get a business license now before the application process even starts. Whereas the agent card process is going to open up 30 days prior to the application 10-day window when we announce the 30-day window. So to answer your question, no, it's not required, but you can start the business license now. You can start the agent card application process once the 30-day announcement has been posted.
If you currently hold the agent card, will you be required to do another fingerprint and background check?
Yes, that is a requirement of the application to get fingerprinted and submitted to DPS within this application.
Does having a misdemeanor over 10 years ago disqualify you from applying? And do you need to own a dispensary in order to open a lounge?
No, the misdemeanor, especially 10 years old, would not disqualify you from getting an agent card.
And I think the second part to that question was, do you need to own a retail store in order to open a lounge? Is that correct?
Correct.
And no, you obviously you do not. It's the retail attached. Yes, you need to have a dispensary. The independents, it's anybody can apply for an independent, and a social equity applicant can apply for an independent social equity license.
Is there a square footage restriction for build out?
No, there's no square footage, just limited. And the local jurisdictions could create a limit, but by state now, there's no limitation.
All right. How is adjacent being defined for a retail location? Does the lounge need to be connected, or is being in the same complex or shopping center considered adjacent?
And that would be an independence. You'd have to have your attorneys or check it out with NCCR 15.100 subsection 2B defines immediately adjacent. I read it out earlier. Again, it's having a common border with another property, including intersection of property lines at property corners with no street, building, or other property between, and it must be approved by the local jurisdiction.
Can a majority owner on one lounge application apply as a 4% or less interest holder on another lounge application?
They hold less than 4% on another application. Can they apply for, is that what the question was? Sorry.
Yeah, apply as 4% or less interest on another lounge application. So a majority owner on one and 4% or less on another lounge application.
Yes, if you own less than 5%, it will not limit you from applying for a license, another license.
Can you also have a beer and wine license for the cannabis lounge?
Right now, no alcohol or tobacco will be allowed on the premises of a cannabis consumption lounge.
And this is a question regarding social equity. Do all applicants have to meet all three criteria? 51% ownership, residence in a DIA, and cannabis-related events.
Yes, they do. There's obviously different ways to get to it, but yes, they must meet all the criteria.
And then if you do not get selected in this application round, can the processing fee be applied towards a future application round?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry.
If you do not get selected in this application round, can this processing fee be applied towards a future application round?
No, it can't.
How are applications graded, and is there a lottery system?
Well, in this one, there's rated by filling out the application. So you got to completely fill out the application appropriately. If you do fill it out and pay your fee, and you can fill out the registered agent card so we can get your background checks, you'll be entered into a random number generator, and the random number generator will select 10 independents and 10 social equities. If it's a retail attached, the retail attached, all they have to do is apply and meet the minimum criteria in the application, and they will be granted a conditional retail attached license.
Does the consumption lounge have to be open to the public, or can it be a private lounge?
We don't have any limitation like that, so it could be a private club.
Can a cultivation or production license owner, if selected, put the lounge on the property the facility is, their production or cultivation facility is located?
I believe so long as they meet the minimum distance requirements, it's not a problem. And unfortunately for them, they still have to purchase from a dispensary all the product that they sell on site.
Okay. Will dispensaries sell the product at a discount to the lounges, or will the lounge have to charge more than what dispensaries would make a would?
I think that's a business decision on the part of the retail consumption lounge and the retail store.
Correct.
And some of the other questions we got are regarding when the application is going to be open, which I'm not sure if you all want to touch on that right now.
Right now, we don't have the set time frame. We should be sending out the 30-day notice soon, and that document will have the specific dates when the applications will be taken.
And some of the other questions that we have are not regarding the application process, but the regulation. So I'm going to move on to the live questions. If you have a question, please click on the raise hand icon if you're using the Zoom app. If you're joining by phone, press *9 to raise your hand. And once I allow you to talk, you'll be prompted to unmute yourself. Please remember this is a public forum. We will not engage in back and forth, and nor can we address specific circumstances or hypotheticals. If we're not able to get to you during this time, please type your question in the chat so we can make sure to address it and include it in the FAQs, which we will post next week. Okay, and the first person we have is Robert Wank.
Hi, guys. Thank you for taking my question. In regards to the DIA, is there a rating system that's based off that, or is there a minimum requirement that you have to hit based off the rating system for the DIA?
I can go ahead and answer that one. So you have to qualify in the two categories. So it has to be 3.3% incarceration rate or higher. And that is the tool where you use the Opportunity Atlas to check your census tract. And then the area must also have an area deprivation index score of 7 or higher. So the area, you'll use both tools and you'll type in the address, and it has to hit both of those scores, 3.3% or higher in the incarceration rate and 7 or higher in the state decile area deprivation index.
And does that have to be for the full 5 years?
Yes. So you'll provide evidence for each year that you lived in those DIAs.
Okay.
So if you lived
thank
in the same location for 5 years, you'll provide evidence for each year that you lived there.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, the next person we have is Jason Hausel.
My question is more related to the zoning of the independent lounges. Will there be designated zones in Clark County that will be assigned for independent lounges?
So that'd definitely be a question for Clark County. We have nothing to do with their zoning or where they'll actually allow the lounges outside of just the minimum distance requirements.
John Ray.
You're muted, John Ray.
Hello, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, I'm asking about two things. I came late and I don't know what the DIA, if you can explain that. And can one person hold a license by himself or he has to have a partner? Thank you.
You could definitely have partners. Again, at least 51% need to be social equity applicants if it's a social equity independent lounge you're applying for. And Sarah just went over the indexes, and maybe you can give a really brief one again, Sarah.
So the DIA is a disproportionately impacted area, and that's one of the three qualifications to be a social equity applicant. So the first is 51% or greater ownership. The second is having lived in a disproportionately impacted area or DIA for the last 5 years. And the third is the cannabis conviction. Okay. The next person we have is Sullivan Roche.
Hi, thank you. I have two questions. One, will there be a deadline once a conditional license is issued for that consumption lounge to become operational? And
Right now, yes, it's 12 months. However, you can apply for a waiver if you're unable to get it open within 12 months. And that's 12 months after you receive your conditional license.
Understood, thank you. My second question is, can a lounge license be moved to a new location, provided that the new location meets with local zoning and setbacks?
The problem with that is we have to have an address to begin it. And that address, all you have to do is give a local jurisdiction. However, right now by statute, you cannot move between local jurisdictions. So whatever local jurisdiction you pick, at least for now, that is where your lounge must remain. You can move within that local jurisdiction, but you have to stay within that local jurisdiction. And that's just a statutory requirement.
Okay. Next, we have Katri Saunders.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering if you have a federal cannabis conviction, how does that impact you for applying for social equity?
That would be included. It would be considered a conviction for the social equity, depending on obviously what the conviction is. It could be federal or state.
Next, we have Josh Myers.
Good evening. My question is, I guess, kind of based on the random generator. What is the board doing to kind of oversee, I guess, getting multiple licenses awarded to like the same jurisdiction? I guess, how are you dispersing the licenses based on location and jurisdiction?
Solely based on the applicant. There's going to be no quotas for jurisdictions. It's just going to be what the applicant desires and where he wants to place his lounge.
Okay, and next we have Rachel or Rochelle Lee.
Hi, thank you. Either one is fine. My question is, once the applicant hits the DIA requirements, and if they hit all three and they're placed in the random number generator, do they go into that random number generator with other applicants who have hit all three as well? All three.
Yes, there'll be a separate drawing for social equity applicants.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. If you'd like to ask a question, you can raise the raise hand icon if you're using the Zoom app, or you can press *9 to raise your hand if you're joining us by phone.
Yeah, I'd like to point out too, we had a couple of questions about jurisdiction, address, and moving. Also, again, I just want to warn everybody too that not all jurisdictions are likely to allow consumption lounges. So please make sure you check with your local jurisdiction before you select, before you lock yourself in when you select it on the application, because you are locked into that jurisdiction. Even if they don't allow them for the next several years, you're still stuck in that local jurisdiction.
Okay, we have no more live questions, but we have a couple more in the chat. Will the draw for licenses be live? And can I come watch in person?
They will be live. We have not decided yet if there will be a public forum. We'll give notification during that application period, letting everybody know how that random number event's going to take place, where it's going to take place. Some more information to come.
And then how long is the application period?
The application period is going to be open for 10 days, 10 business days. And that announcement will be made 30 days prior to that 10-day window.
At least 30 days, maybe a little longer, but at least 30 days.
Yeah.
There's some more questions that we had covered in the presentation. One is, will you take cash, which we covered, and we will not take cash. It's only ACH payments or check or money order.
Correct.
And we have another live question from Danny Baranowski.
Sorry, this is actually Xavier. I'm not sure how this name got mixed up, but the question was on the diversity, equity, and inclusion plan. When it comes to the hiring portion in terms of what the board would like to see, is that like working with, I guess, certain groups, or because I'm sure we can't hire based off of diversity?
The plan is what you make it. I'm sure there are groups you can work with to help you with your diversity plan and how you want to implement your diversity plan. Again, we're not locked into any one way to do things right now.
Okay, and now we have Rob Macias.
Hi, hello. Thank you for taking my question. I did join in a little bit late, so I apologize if this is redundant, but if you could please explain what is an agent card, and does everybody that owns the consumption lounge and that works in the consumption lounge have to have an agent card? Thank you.
So an agent card is required for all owners, officers, and board members, as well as executives within the organizations, and also all employees, volunteers, and contractors that are either working or contracting or volunteering for any cannabis establishment, which includes consumption lounges. So yes, it's required for all employees of the consumption lounge, as well as owners, officers, and board members.
Okay, next we have Hasmeek Jorgensen.
Hi there. Thank you for the opportunity to ask the question. So my first question is, when applying for agent cards, would we apply as owners? Would it be a prospective owner agent card, or would we just apply for just a normal agent card and apply with that?
Yeah, that's a good question. So those of you that are familiar with the agent card process, when we do launch the new consumption lounge agent card application process for the consumption lounge application, you'll notice there will be some changes, and it'll allow you to choose to be an owner, officer, or board member for a consumption lounge, which puts you in a different category that we're able to review prior to the prospective license is being issued, as well as after the prospective license have been awarded. So I hope that answers your questions. You'll see in the agent card application online in Excella that there are choices to go through the consumption lounge process. But again, I'll just add that that application won't be launched, or that component of the app of Excel won't be launched until the announcement has been made that that we're going to be opening up the application window. So probably 30 days prior to the 10-day window.
And we have another question in the chat you've already answered, but I think it's worth answering again. As the owner of a dispensary, do we need to file an application during the application period, or will we be able to file at a later time?
Oh, the only time you can file an application is during the open application period. That includes dispensaries. If dispensary wants a retail attached consumption lounge license, they must apply during the 10-day window. That is the only time.
Okay. At what point in the process should the company have their employees begin applying for lounge agent cards?
Definitely not until a prospective license is issued. And then once the suitability check has been completed, then you move into a conditional status. And it would be your decision when to do that in that process. But again, an employee doesn't need a card until that establishment has been opened and those employees are on site.
I have another question from John Ray.
Thank you for taking my question again about the agent card. How long it lasts, how often we have to renew it, and if we get it and we don't get the license, is revoked or we keep it? Thank you.
Yeah, and it was pointed out in the PowerPoint earlier that the fee for the agent card isn't required until a prospective license is issued. Therefore, your application would be canceled if you weren't successful in the random number draw. The cards cost $150. They're good for 2 years. Background checks are required every 2 years upon renewal of that agent card at the 2-year period.
Okay, if you have any more questions, you can hit the raise hand icon or press *9 if you're joining by phone. I have another question regarding the application process. Will the application period be expected to open by the end of the year?
By the end of the year?
Yes.
Yes.
By the end of this year.
Yes, we do expect to have the 10-day open application period by the end of the year. Absent some extenuating circumstance, it will be open by the end of the year.
Do you have to have a location before applying for a license?
No, you don't have to have a specific address. You do have to have a local jurisdiction. You have to pick where you're going to locate your consumption lounge. There will be a drop-down menu on the application that lists all the local jurisdictions you can select from. Again, I want to point out that you should also check with your local jurisdiction to see if they're going to allow consumption lounges to open. There are jurisdictions that are not going to allow consumption lounges within their jurisdiction. So please check.
We have a couple more live questions. The first one is Connie Harper. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your names.
Yes, that's fine. I was wondering whether the slides that were shown during the presentation will be available to people on this call.
Most of the slides that we showed today, you can find in the YouTube videos that we have on our website. So slides in this video we're taking from our preparing to apply workshop, our social equity workshop, and our diversity plan workshop. So you can find those on the CCB website. Additionally, this entire webinar is being live streamed and the entire thing will be available on YouTube. So you'll have the slides there as well.
Thank you.
Okay. The next question we have is from Nathaniel Turner.
Thank you. I have a quick question. Can the same company with the same ownership structure apply for social equity and independent if they meet all the requirements for social equity?
Well, essentially, a social equity applicant is an independent. So if you want to apply as a social equity applicant and you meet all those qualifications, you should probably apply as a social equity applicant. Otherwise, you can choose to apply as a general independent.
But you cannot apply, you can't apply twice. If you end up applying twice, both your applications will be removed. So it's either the independent or the social equity, one or the other.
Okay, we have a few more in the Q&A. Once the application period closes, how many days after will the state announce the selected applicants?
We're still going through that now. We'll communicate that once we get closer to that time frame, but we're not sure of that window right now, but it will be communicated.
If I get a license, how soon am I allowed to sell it?
If you get a cannabis consumption lounge license, you need to have the lounge open and operational for 2 years before you can sell it.
Okay, and
So it has to be open and operational for 2 years.
Is the selection process effectuated by a CCB team member or a computer?
Steve, you want to?
Yeah, the random number selector will be a computer.
Yep.
But yeah, so I think that was the question. It will be a computer.
If I'm a franchisee and my franchisor has no ownership or board positions, do they need agent cards?
Can you repeat that, sir? I'm sorry.
If I am a franchisee and my franchisor has no ownership or board positions, do they need agent cards?
You know, it's a great question. I'd have to look into that a little bit, and we'd have to really look at that relationship and the control that the franchisor has over the franchisee's operations. That's a great question. We'd love to research that and get an answer posted on the website.
After the 2 years, is a social equity license holder able to sell to anyone or someone who is eligible for social equity?
They will be allowed to sell to anyone. It's not a restricted license, just have to be open and operational for 2 years.
And then the random number generator question. After random number is assigned by a computer, so the computer will be selecting the winners, not a CCB team member.
Correct.
He clarified the question. Okay.
Oh, correct.
I have another live question from John Ray. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, just maybe a stupid question, but I try to understand. We can apply for social or independent. Is that correct?
Correct. One or the other. Either if you qualify for the social equity applicant, you know the application fee is only $2,500. If you don't qualify for a social equity applicant, you apply as an independent, and that application fee is $10,000. And excuse me, processing fee.
How many social equity licenses will be approved?
10.
And I have a question that says, do you have to have a conviction to be considered a DIA? So The DIA is actually the disproportionately impacted area. So a conviction, having lived in a DIA and the 51% 51% ownership are all aspects of the social equity applicant qualification. Right. And I don't see any other questions that haven't been covered already. Do we have any more live questions? You can click on the raise hand icon or press *9. Okay, we have a couple more. The first is Jessica Feingold.
Hi, couple questions. One is if a retail consumption lounge is awarded to a location that is co-located with a retail store, will we have to submit a modification of premise to build out the consumption lounge, since the entire premise is part of the license, the retail license entity?
Are you asking if you can co-locate with another retail type store?
No, let me clarify. So as part of the qualification for the application, right? So it's a retail store applying for a retail consumption lounge that is at the same address location. So co-located at the same location. Will the applicant have to, I guess, once it's awarded the license, will it have to submit a modification of premise to build out the store, to build out the lounge rather?
Yes, you would have to submit like a modification of your facility, to our inspection audit team for them to review.
Okay. And then a follow-up question to that is, once the retail consumption lounge is awarded the license, is there any required timeline to build out the lounge space?
It would be the same. You got a 12-month time frame once you receive the license. However, again, depending on circumstances, you can request an extension to the 12 months.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, well, we can start to wrap up now. If we were unable to get to you during this time, we will address your questions in the FAQs, which we will post on the CCB website next week. So make sure to check out the website in the next week or so, and we will post all of your questions that we weren't able to address during this webinar. Okay. If you have any follow-up questions, you can email us at ccbconsumptionlounge@ccb.nv.gov, and we'll be sure to answer you. And then we will also have a second webinar following a similar format on September 30th. For details and to sign up, visit our website. Otherwise, please keep an eye out for updated information and notices from the CCB. The easiest way to do that is to subscribe through our website. Lastly, you should receive a link to fill out a brief survey about the webinar. Your response is appreciated as it will help us create future webinars. Thank you and have a good evening.